and gentlemen, and we are back with episode 7 of Moksha Talks, and this time with the celebration of freedom, the Passover story. In conversation with Yael Silliman and Nandini Mukherjee, and I will introduce you to them a little bit later. First, I need to thank the Creative Academy for having us here, and this is a beautiful venue. It's been lovely working over here, and I just wish there were more people who came forward and listened to what we were trying to do. Let's keep hoping that the crowds will increase. Shivalika?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shivalika, and I'm the program manager at the Creative Arts. So basically, firstly, I would like to thank Shampa ma'am for doing her Moksha Talks over here, and this is the 3rd episode, and we are really happy and grateful to her for coming here with such a great and lovely audience. And second is our show, The Dice of Desire, that is a theatre performance based on the women characters of Mahabharata. So that is on 22nd April and 23rd April at ICCR at 7 p.m. So if you guys can come and join us, it would be really great, and you can get your passes from the desk.
Okay, Yael. Now, she's been at gunpoint telling me that I shouldn't take more than 3 sentences to introduce her. How I'm going to do that, I don't know, because she's a woman of many facets. And I think everyone in Kolkata, perhaps even India and the world knows her. But I will still say my bit, so you can kill me later. She was born into a Baghdadi Jewish community of Kolkata. Her ancestor was the first Jew to land in Kolkata in 1796, and the Baghdadi community grew from then on. Yael was educated at Wellesley College, Massachusetts, Harvard University, University of Texas, Austin, and received a doctoral degree in international education at Columbia University. She was a tenured associate professor of women's studies at the University of Iowa, USA. She was also a program officer at the Ford Foundation, New York. She is the author of several books, scholarly papers, popular articles for newspapers and magazines on gender, development, race, social justice, women's rights issues, and writes about her community, the Baghdadi Jews of Calcutta. She has also created an archive on the Calcutta Jewish community. Yael dons many hats, and she also puts on an artist's apron and picks up a brush. Painting, she feels, has given her the confidence to explore the unexplored part of her, parts that lay deep down in the subconscious. Delighted to have you here, and delighted to have met you. Please, can we have a round of applause? We will also have over here, even though she's running away from the seat at the moment, Nandini Mukherjee. She was here with me on the first episode of Moksha Talks. She's an academician. Her erudition leaves me zapped every time I meet her. And it's been wonderful to be her colleague and to work with her. And now she has been a full-time supporter of Moksha Talks. So thank you so much for doing this for us. I am Shampa Mukherjee, and I'm telling you why I'm introducing myself yet again. Because when we did the Macbeth show, my friend Bubla told me that apparently people were writing into her and referring to me as Moksha Mukherjee. So I needed to correct that, and I needed to tell the world that I'm not. I mean, I do have a boutique and a brand called Moksha, but that's not my name. But jokes aside, thank you very much for being here. And those of you who will watch this on YouTube later, please do send in your comments. Please do send in the feedback, because that's something that keeps us challenged. That's something that makes us want to do more and think about newer and newer facets of what we might want to read, study, research, and work on. Now, why did we think about Yael, and why did I think about this? My first tryst with Jewish history actually was when my parents took me to watch the Ten Commandments. We were just talking about that film a little while ago. And I remember being completely fascinated by everything that I saw. And when that Red Sea parted, I could have been dancing on the seat that I was there. I couldn't believe that something like that would actually happen. Much, much later, many years later, I was in the Hollywood studios and they took us around and we watched that Red Sea parting. And I wished I hadn't watched it because it was such a letdown. It was like a tiny little passage of water which just magically moves away, and that becomes so phenomenally rich on screen. But it was my first ever brush with Jewish history, so to speak. The second time I was really interested, and this time I was in college, so I was really interested, was when I read Leon Uris's Exodus. And I think in Presidency College, which is where we studied at that time, a lot of us were into this. We all read that book up, and there is a mention of Passover over there, and a character called Karen dies. And I remember being heartbroken, but I was also very curious to know what this Passover was all about, and I thought it was such a fascinating thing that the Jewish people celebrate all over the world. So this led me to why we wanted to talk about this, and so it is one of the best known Jewish holidays, as much for its connection to Jewish redemption and the figure of Moses, as it is for its ties with Christian history. The Last Supper apparently was a Passover Seder. It is also the celebration of the Jewish delivery from Egypt, from slavery to freedom in 13th century BC. Nandini is going to start the proceedings with a prayer. And what I found very interesting about that prayer is that I think all prayers all over the world speak the same language. I really found that quite fascinating.
So I'll begin with the opening prayer of the Passover ceremony. Long ago, at this season, our people, set out on a journey. On such a night as this, Israel went forth from degradation to joy. We give thanks for the liberations of days gone by, and we pray for all who are still bound, still denied their human rights. Eternal God, may all who hunger come to rejoice in a new Passover. Let all the human family sit at your table, drink the wine of deliverance, eat the bread of freedom. Freedom from bondage.
And freedom from oppression.
Freedom from hunger.
And freedom from want.
Freedom from hatred.
And freedom from fear.
Freedom to think.
And freedom to speak.
Freedom to teach.
And freedom to learn.
Freedom to love.
And freedom to share.
Freedom to hope soon in our days.
And freedom to rejoice. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Do you still want to sit here, or do you
I'd
want
like
to
to
go?
listen as an audience. I'll come back.
I'll call you back when I need you again. So why is Passover your favorite festival, Yael?
Okay, first let me say thank you all for being here. And I just want to give you some reference for the beautiful prayer that Nandini just read to us. This comes from the Haggadah. It's the book that we read during the Seder ceremony. And it tells the story about the delivery of the Jewish people from Egypt into freedom. So that is the story of Passover. Are we going to talk about the story of Passover?
Of course you can.
So basically the story of Passover is the story you see in the Ten Commandments, but just to remind you, this we believe was a historical reality. So this is a historical festival. It's a festival where we remember our history and we rejoice that God saved us on this day. So it's a very happy day. This is a day that's really about family. It's a day about community where we all sit around the table and we read this book together. Okay, now this book is a Xerox copy. Everybody has their own version of Haggadah. You know, they say when you have two Jews, you have three opinions. So we have many, many versions of the Haggadah. And also we have many sects of Jewish people too. So for example, the Orthodox or the Hasidic Jews that you would see in Europe are very conservative. We call them Orthodox. Their ceremony and their Haggadah would look very different from this Haggadah, which I have used with my family. Then there are the Jews who are like us. My family is a Baghdadi family, we're Arab Jews. We were conservative. And our Haggadah didn't look like this either. Our Haggadah was all in Hebrew, and we would sit as children. We would spend our Seder, our evening, the first and second days of Passover, at the Nahum families, because they're related to my mother. And we would have a room almost as big as this, with a table for 40 or 50 people. And anybody who was in town from anywhere in the world who was Jewish or other would be invited to their Seder. And as little children, we always celebrated Seder there. We said the prayers in Hebrew and didn't know too much of what was happening, but that was the way we did it in a conservative style. Then the Reform Jews, which is the more modern sort of Jews, many in America and also in Israel, have their own Seder, which I really loved, because it's a very political Seder, and it talks about Jewishness today, Jewishness in the past, and it brings in all kinds of new ideas to the Seder table. So I usually celebrate Seder, and I love Seder, coming back to your question, because you're not in the synagogue. Women are the boss in the family. I was the boss of my Seder. I knew how I wanted to run my Seder. And my Seder usually had about 20, 25 people wherever I was in the United States when there was a Jewish community. And I particularly wanted my children, and that's the story of Passover, to understand why it's important to know your roots and your traditions, and yet to keep them engaged and interested, because children are a very important part, as you'll hear later, about the Passover story, because it's the next generation who will take our traditions forward. So the Seder has been happening for over 2,000 years. It happens in every Jewish home, every year. Jews from wherever they are flock to a Passover service. The biggest one actually is in Kathmandu, where, yes, because there were a lot of trekkers and people who would go backpacking, and Israelis in India. And Chabad House, which is a Jewish organization to cater to the needs of Jews all over the world. It's a sort of more conservative organization, has 2,000 people in their Seder in Kathmandu. And people from all over Nepal would come. So it's became quite a tradition. I don't think they're holding it this year. So that's the biggest Seder that there is. But that becomes a community event. But usually it's a family event, a family and friends, and everybody's supposed to be part of the Seder ceremony. So I love the Seder because it's a chance for me to talk about Jewishness in the context of my feminist, my political, my social justice, my anti-racism beliefs, and all that is accepted in Passover. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. So that's why Passover is my favorite festival, because I'm not a very religious Jew, but I love my cultural history.
So how is it celebrated? I mean, what are the various...
Okay. So Passover lasts for 7 days, okay, in Israel. In the other parts of the world, 8 days, because they were not sure of the lunar calendar and the time, so to be safe, to pick up the time right, people outside Israel celebrate for 8 days. It's this festival where 2 nights we have the Passover Seder. The Seder is the reading of the story of the Haggadah in a very ceremonial kind of event with lots of acting, traditions, symbols, which we are going to discuss with you as well. And of course, followed by a wonderful meal. We drink 4 to 5 cups of wine, and we basically celebrate our deliverance from Egypt. So that's what we do in Passover. In Israel, they do it for 1 night. In the rest of the world, we do it for 2 nights. Passover goes on for 2 nights. And there are many traditions. Passover traditions vary among Jews of different parts of the world. And we don't go to synagogue. It's not a time we need to go to synagogue. We start with the blessing with the candles, and then we have a wonderful dinner. And after dinner, there's a lot of singing and songs. And you start with the Hebrew songs, and there's songs that everybody sings for Passover. But for example, when we were kids, I'm talking about the 1960s, at Nahum's, we always ended with Sound of Music, and what are our favorite things, and that's perfectly okay to just everybody to enjoy themselves. So that's what we do in Seder, and it's an elaborate ceremony, and it's a fun ceremony, which you can see. We've got a few elements of the important elements of the Seder right here with you.
What about those 4 children and the 4 questions that they're supposed to ask?
So I'll start with saying the first question of Seder, when we all sit down together, is why is this night different from all other nights? It is different from all other nights because we celebrate our freedom. We sit together as a family, and we have children participating in the Seder. They have very important roles to play, especially the youngest child gets to have the special questions. They're the one who's asked, why is this night different from all other nights? Oh, I forgot to tell you, we also sing a lot in Seder, and we're going to play some of that music for you as well. So it's singing, it's acting, it's children, it's reading, it's symbols. So everybody enjoys Seder. I think 70% of Jews all over the world say it's their favorite festival. And I wish I could have done a Seder with all of you. So the questions we have, the children is, there's a wise child, like all of you, who want to know more about the Seder, want to know about their religion and their traditions, and they're encouraged to ask questions during the Seder if there's anything they don't understand, anything they want to know more about. Then there's a rebel child, the child who says, what's this got to do with me? This history happened thousands of years ago. Why should I care about this story? Why should it matter to me? So that's the rebel child, they call the wicked child, the selfish child, and this is all 2,000 years ago. We have these children as part of the Seder ceremony with a part to play. And then we have the simple child who doesn't even know what questions to ask. And the 4th child is, there's the child who wants just the basics. He doesn't need to know too much. So it could be a child who just wants to know just the basic story, not too much, and then the simple child who doesn't even know what questions to ask. So we say, and there are lots of interpretations, is that it represents the different kind of people in the world. And if you want to tell the story and engage all people, especially all Jewish children, we have to meet those children where they are, so they can slowly begin to understand at the level which they want that they are part of the Jewish people, and they must also understand why it's important to learn about their history and their freedom. So that's about children in the Seder, and there are many other roles that they play, which I'll talk to you about later in
May
the
I
Seder
ask a
ceremony.
question at this stage about the children? Is this the way that you're handing down information to the generations that follow?
Exactly.
Do they also understand that the Jewish people have spread all over the world? And do they understand why?
Yes, I think so. And it really depends on who runs the Seder and what conversations you want to have. And so every family will run a very different kind of Seder.
Yes.
Now, for example, we grew up, my children grew up in the States, and they learned a lot about African American history, right? And you have to ask questions of the Seder. So one of the questions, the child comes with the unleavened bread, and they put it on their back, and they come into the room, and you say, where are you coming from? And they're supposed to say Egypt. And where are you going to? And they're supposed to say Israel. And so I'd ask Shika, and who took the Jews out of Egypt towards freedom? She said, Martin Luther King, So, and that's okay too, because she understood Martin Luther King was a person who freed African Americans, and she could make the connection to the Seder story, and that's fine. That's what we do in Seder. We make constantly those connections because we know that the story of Passover is a story that not only happened 3,000 years ago, happening today. Oppression, freedom, slavery, these are all concepts that are very alive and well. So we must connect, and that's part of the Seder story, is to understand other forms of oppression, what suffering other people are going through, and try to relate to that as well.
Okay, now the Seder plate.
Okay, so
I'm very excited about this.
Well, she's done a lot of work about the Seder plate. So we have a big table, and we have cups of wine that are laid out because we're going to drink 4. And we have a Seder platter. And the Seder plate, my mother was saying in the old days, we were Arab Jews, so a big kancha, where they used to make the baklava, they used to use that for Seder. Except Seder, you have to have a new one, because you're not allowed to, you have to use everything special for Pesach. And we call it Pesach, not Passover. So this is the Seder plate, which is on the table and which the blessings are made on. And we go in a Seder, which means an order of what you're going to eat. So I'm going to point out to the different things that we have on this platter, okay?
And each one, I'm guessing, has a layer of meaning.
Which we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So, this is an American version, it comes from America, what we call matzah. It's the unleavened bread. Because the Jews had to run away, okay, very quickly when the Pharaoh said, you can go, let my people go, and he said go before they called him back from the Red Sea, they had to eat bread that was unleavened. And so it's told in the Bible that you must remember Seder, you must remember Passover, and you must only eat unleavened bread. Now, Nandini is going to tell you that this bread, which we got in America and we ate, is not what we ate in Calcutta. In Calcutta, we had fantastic matzah, which was more like a tandoor roti, which was so delicious. And it was made in the synagogue, and it was, the wheat was specially grown for the occasion, and we loved the matzah coming to the home. So this is now what we eat, because matzahs are no longer available in Calcutta, but Nandini is going to give you an impression of what it was like in Passover when we were making matzahs at the synagogue.
I'm going to read an extract from Yael's book, Jewish Portraits, Indian Friends. It's a lovely book. She's just given me one, and I've already read 2 chapters. There's a chapter on her mother, Mrs. Silliman, who was our teacher in school. And so there's a chapter on flour, and there's a chapter on Yael herself. So I've already started reading the book.
Maybe if you can close your eyes and imagine what it looked like in Calcutta before Passover started, right now.
A month before Pesach, under the scorching Calcutta sun, there is a great deal of hustle and bustle in the compound of the Bethel Synagogue. Temporary bamboo and leaf structures shield matzah makers busy at work. Poorer Jewish women sit on low wooden stools, adeptly kneading, pummeling, and molding unleavened dough. The wheat for the dough has been specially grown up country following halakhic laws and is brought down to Calcutta for this annual ritual. Another group of women sit cross-legged on the ground, rolling out the dough balls. Their wooden rolling pins and the large marble slabs on which they work are used only during Passover. The flattened dough rounds, 15 inches in diameter, are collected quickly to be baked before the dough can rise. Jewish men place coals in the fire to light the tandoors, built each year on the synagogue premises. Learned men from the community supervise the entire production to make sure that the rules of the matzah board are strictly observed. Jewish families buying and weighing matzahs fill the courtyard. They exchange news, gossip, and discuss their Pesach preparations. The matzah board makes free matzahs available to the poorer members of the community so that no Jew will go without during the festival. Thin and brittle matzahs lie one atop the other to be weighed on huge wooden and rope scales. After being weighed, stacks of matzahs are placed in shallow cane baskets. Some of the precious cargo is sent to Jewish homes by horse cart and rickshaw. Coolies too hoist the baskets atop their heads and make their way with their light but unwieldy loads through busy Calcutta streets to deliver the goods intact. There was a thriving Jewish community in Calcutta in the 19th and first half of the 20th century. At the beginning of the 21st century, only a handful of elderly Baghdadi Jews remains. A few matzahs are still made locally by non-Jews, supervised by Jews, for the Jews who are left. Very soon, matzahs will no longer be made in Calcutta. The Jewish community will exist only as a memory, though a few impressive structures mark the Jewish presence. Many of the community institutions and the stately synagogues they built continue to run on Jewish trust funds. The Jewish Girls' School, once the center of community life, has no Jewish girls attending it. It has been increasingly difficult. It's been increasingly difficult for the synagogues to attain a minyan, the 10 men required to conduct a service. The imposing edifices and physical spaces that denote a Jewish presence are hollow, for they are bereft of the people and social relations that gave them their purpose and meaning.
So this was written 25 years ago, but
And may I just add that you're not just a painter with paints, you actually paint with words. I could
Yes.
actually visualize this whole scene, people sitting,
Yes.
people cross-legged. I mean, such
It's very
beautiful
visual,
writing.
very
Thank you.
tactile,
Yes.
all the senses are there.
Beautiful writing.
thank you.
Thank you for sharing this
So,
with us.
so the matzahs, big and round, 15 inches in diameter, and delicious. This is not delicious, okay? This is what our poor Ashkenazi Jews around the world have to contend with. So we were lucky. Now, the Seder plate, you know the story of Passover. It's called Passover. Why? Do you know why it's called Passover? Okay, it's called Passover because many plagues were sent, which we'll discuss. But the last plague, which was the killing of the firstborn child, okay, was that God told the Jews, if you put blood from a lamb over your doorway, the angel of death will pass over your house and your children will not die. Okay, and that's how the firstborn was saved. So it's called Passover for that reason, or Pesach. So let's talk about the different pieces of food that we eat during Passover. So one of this is called maror. Maror, this is parsley, and this is lettuce, did you say? Yeah. And we used to have celery growing up, parsley and celery, but you can have any bitter vegetable. And it's dipped in this, which is just water and salt. But we used to have limbu when we were growing up on our Seder table. And this was to remember the bitter days when we were in slavery. And we dip it in salt water to remember all the tears that were shed during the 300 years of slavery in Egypt, okay, in the land of Goshen at the time they called it. Then, you know, they say the Jews built the pyramids, right? So supposedly we did, but we did it as slaves, not as free people. And so here, this is a Western version, it's called a charoset, and it's made of apples, nuts, and wine, which is to remember or recall the mortar, the bricks and mortar of which we made the pyramids. Now, this is a Western recipe, but we had, you know, I always say ours is much better. You know, like I said, our matzah is better. Well, our charoset was also better. We basically had just date, you know, date juice, that rich, treacle-like date juice, and we mixed it with walnuts, and we used to dip the matzah into that and have that all the time for breakfast during the Passover. But with each one of these, we say a special blessing when we go to it. Now here we have an egg. Okay, it's supposed to be a roasted egg. We used to have boiled eggs, and this is to remember the roasted sacrifice that we made. But the egg also represents spring and redemption and rebirth. Regeneration and rebirth. And that all happens when you become a free person. And then we have the, can you just take up that because I don't touch meat? I'm a vegetarian. This is the shank bone. And the shank bone is to represent the outstretched arm of God who delivered us from slavery to freedom. Okay? Now, for, Jews always find ways to do things, and even way back in the Talmud, which is written in the 5th century, I would never have a shank bone on my Seder table because I'm vegetarian. But, the Talmud, there are always scholars who find ways out. They said you didn't have to have a shank bone, you could have a beet. And so I always had a beet on my Seder table. Now,
I found that
this
very
is
interesting,
a
but-
traditional Seder table, okay, the Seder plate. And you're not supposed to mess with it, you're supposed to keep it in order. But I always put an orange on my Seder plate. Now, there was a very famous rabbi, and she was a woman, and she wanted to go up and read the prayers, and we're a patriarchal religion. And they said, no, she can't go up. She's a woman. She can't be going up and saying the prayers on the bima, which is, the place in the synagogue, the stand where the prayers are said from. And she said, if you have her there, it's like having an orange on the Seder plate, right? It's so incongruous. It doesn't fit. An orange doesn't fit on the Seder plate. So I always put an orange on my Seder plate because I remember, that this is what the rabbi said. And most progressive modern Jews and women and feminists, we used to control the Seder because we cook the dinner and get the platters ready. We put an orange on our Seder plate as well. So the Seder plate has pretty much remained the same. But the way we tell the story changes according to time.
Just 1 minute. In this picture, I have the Star of David in the middle. Is that a custom?
You can have anything. The Star of David is a symbol of Judaism, as is the menorah.
Exactly.
And so you have now very expensive, wonderful Seder plates. And Shampa made a great effort, but this is what a Seder plate looks like. You can go online and get very fancy silver
You
ones
do,
and
you
pottery
do,
ones
actually.
and all kinds of other Seder plates, but that's all marketing, Most of us just had a plate that looked like this. So that's the Seder plate that we have during Passover.
Thank you. Okay, now moving on to the plagues.
Oh, the plagues.
So apparently, the one of the most dramatic moments of the Passover Seder is the recitation of the 10 plagues. And I'm going to read out the order, but I would also want to ask you if you could just explain with one. For instance, the first one is blood.
Yeah.
So
So you
all
said it-
water turned to blood?
Yeah, and so in Hebrew you would say dam means blood, sephadeia, frog. So this we say in Hebrew, but you wouldn't understand Hebrew, but we recount the plagues that God said. So why don't you read them with a little bit of drama?
Yeah. So the drama, I can't do frogs with drama. Blood, then frogs, then lice, good Lord. The next one is flies, then pestilence, then boils.
After all, you're there.
Hail, yeah, I know. Hail, locusts, darkness, and killing of the firstborn.
So those were the 10 plagues that God sent down, because what happened? The Jews were suffering, they were in a lot of pain, and Moses was sent back to, he was living with a Midianite woman, Zipporah. So he was living over there, and God said, you know how the story of Moses, how he was found in the bulrushes, right? And he was supposed to be killed. And the princess, the Pharaoh's mother, Batya, was coming down to the river. And his sister Miriam, who was really smart, knew she came down to the river. And so she had the little basket over there. And the princess adopted Moses, and he became a prince of the Egyptian people, and he did very, very well. And people didn't know that he was of Jewish religion. But once he learned his story, because Miriam and his mother Yehovah kept in touch with him, secretly, and he knew the suffering of his people, and he saw a person, a slave master, beating a slave very, very violently, and he killed him. I think he stopped it and he killed him. And he had to run, he had to flee for his life. And so he left, and he spent many years away from Egypt, and he was no longer a prince. He became a shepherd. He married a Midianite woman, and whilst he was in the fields with his sheep, God said, you are the one who has to go back to Egypt and tell the Pharaoh, let your people go. Remember that song? Go down, Moses, let your people go. So he goes back, and he tells the Pharaoh to let his people go. And he says, no, because they had lived well in Israel for a long period of time, but this Pharaoh was very cruel and he wanted them to build the pyramids and do all the very hard
Hard
labor
work.
in the hard sun and treated them very badly. And so he said, if you don't let my people go, God said, I will show them through you, what plagues they will suffer. And each plague came, and she mentions each of the plagues, and he finally said, no, I won't let them go. And he had a magician trying to perform the slaves as well. But he couldn't keep up with the kind of plagues that were being sent, because when he said blood, it was the Nile turned into blood. So there was a very dramatic plague. So when we sing and talk about these plagues, in our custom, we have what do you call them? Matka? Where
Bhar.
you par, okay?
Mati Bhar.
And because we're from Calcutta, Bhar. And in other countries, they just have a plate. And with each plague, okay, you go dam, and you put a piece of wine on the table. Sifadea, and you put another piece of wine. And this is to remember, all what happened. And then the bhar, okay, which was full, is then taken out of the house and smashed, because you never want that to come back again, those terrible days. But we also believe that we do this because whilst the terrible suffering was wrought upon Egypt, many innocent people died, and we must never rejoice in the death and plagues and terrible conditions in which the Egyptians had to live. And it's very clearly said in the Bible, even though they were your slave masters and they treated you badly, you must never treat them badly. This is what our religion says. Doesn't mean that's what we do, but that is what the religion teaches us. And so Passover reminds us of our duties, to rejoice in our own freedom, but not to rejoice in other people's suffering. And so that's the story of the 10 plagues that came down upon the Egyptian people.
Would there be a modern day interpretation of these plagues?
Yes, so part of the Seder story is this Seder meal and story goes on for hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours. It started at 7 in the evening with the first cup of wine, and then you'd sing some of the songs, and then everybody has a book with them, and we go around the table and each person reads a passage, and then the next person reads their passage, and then you stop in the middle of passage and says, what does this mean? And what does this mean today? And people will give their own lectures about what they think is happening. And so a lot of people say, depending on the time, what are some of the plagues? Hatred, anti-Semitism, all the kinds of evils that still exist in the world today. And so people will have a discussion about the ones that are happening this moment and today. And for example, in this Passover, of course, there's going to be discussion of what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Iran. And when we talk about the pestilence and the plagues and everything else, many Jews actually are very messianic in their movement. We're waiting for the Mashiach to come again and redeem us. And so even at the Seder table, we'll talk about this later, we have an empty chair and a cup of wine for Elijah the prophet, okay? Because when he comes, it means the Mashiach has come, and we will be all moving into a better place. So whilst we live in this world, there's cruelty and evil and suffering, but I look at interpretations of religious Jews around the world, and they truly believe that just before this Passover, God has redeemed us once again. And they say, for example, the kind of interpretations that go around during Passover, the kind of 300 bombs and drones that were dropped by Iran on Israel, some of which were just almost could have hit the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the most sacred place for Muslims, but also for Jews, and the Wailing Wall. They say, it looks like an iron dome and it looks very easy, and that all of these 300 missiles were scuttled. But what is the Iron Dome? It's actually just a computer program, and as these missiles come, you have to get each one and stop it. So it's very easy for some of them to fall through, and some two did. And actually, a Bedouin child was killed, or she's not killed, but she's very badly injured in a Bedouin home when it hit her home. So they said, this could not have been done by a computer program. This is the hand of God. once again there to protect our people. So the Iron Dome becomes now a metaphor for Passover again and redemption. So the Passover story keeps taking on new meanings
dimensions.
and new dimensions. And of course, immediately at the table, somebody else will argue, that's not what I think it means. And so the story goes on. And then finally, the person who's conducting the Seder said, we'll never finish the Seder if we don't move on. And so the next person's chance to read, and the story continues so that we can actually finish telling the entire story from the book of Exodus.
Okay, now I think it's time to listen to a song.
Yeah, which song are we playing first?
Dino.
So let me tell you what the song is. This is the most famous song of Passover. It's called Dayenu. It would have been enough.
Should I?
No,
Yeah.
just one second. Let me give a context.
Yeah.
So Dayenu is a song. God, if you took us out of Egypt, it would have been enough. If you took us to Israel, it would have been enough. Everything He did would have been enough. But what you've done, you keep doing and you keep doing and you keep doing more for us. Now, Dayenu is a song that when we were children, we recited it, and my uncles and people would say it in Arabic and in Hebrew. But the song was also put into tunes. So my mother said when she was growing up, they used to put Dayenu to different Hollywood numbers at the time. And that's what they do today. Everybody has a traditional one. So you have a Lion King Dayenu, which is in the tune of Lion King.
Which is
that
what
the
I'm
one they're
playing.
going to play? Okay, because I thought you were going to play the traditional one. So this is for the children, okay? So it's a Lion King Dayenu, and you can have this song. And if you go online, you'll see Dayenu, put it down, and you'll have wonderful tunes for Dayenu. So we'll do that.
Ilu ilu otsianu otsianu mi Mitzrayim otsianu mi Mitzrayim dayenu 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 ilu ilu kahalanu etayam dayenu 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 dayenu
Now you've given us the Torah. Even that is great. Now you've given us the Sabbath. Dayenu. Okay, so you got a sense. So this is what you get a sense of how we spend our evening, okay, drinking. We also have cushions on all our chairs because we're free people and we can recline and we can eat reclining. We're not slaves. We're not running away from Egypt. We don't have to sit up. And when we drink our wine, we lean to one side because that's also a symbol of being a free man. So this whole Seder, people love it because it's a story with all the elements of acting, drama, singing, eating that make any evening fun.
Not to forget
So-
the wine drink.
five glasses of wine. The children have apple wine, but they sneak wine too. So we always did that as well.
The lion looked mighty happy singing this song.
Yeah.
We've already discussed the extra cup of wine. That was my question.
Okay.
We finished doing that. Now, Passover has always evolved to be relevant to every generation.
Yeah.
So, how have women now been brought into the many Passover Seders?
Okay, so again, as I told you, this is my Passover, okay, which is common to many Jews across the world. It would be different from my grandmother's, which would be a much more literal reading of the text and much more focused on the prayer and less on the fun, okay? But fun is very important too in every religion, okay? So for me, I love to talk about the Passover story, and in the middle of everything, I'd say, hey guys, let's talk about the women in the Seder story. And my uncle would say, nah, we've talked enough about women. Your mother's already said the prayers. We don't need to talk more about women today. And there's teasing going on. And I said, no, we got to do it. And so I said, do you know who the women are of the Passover story? Because they weren't given the kind of attention they should have been given. But think about it. It was Miriam, okay, who saved her brother Moses by putting him in the bulrushes just in the right place so the queen could see him, okay, and pick him up. Now, going back even before Miriam, the Pharaoh had told them that you have to kill all the firstborn of the Jews. You have to kill all the Jews. You don't let any Jewish boy live, okay? Can't have Jewish boys live. And so there were two midwives, Pua and another midwife as well, who said, no. Now, we don't know if they were Egyptian or they were Jewish, but they were the first ones who said, no, we're not going to do it. And they saved many of those babies. So they were revolutionaries, right? They were women who were doing civil disobedience 3,000 years ago, okay? So Pua and Zipporah, they're very important. There was Moses' mother, okay? Yehoved, it was she actually who was very important in this whole story. There wouldn't be Passover if she didn't give birth to Moses. Now, Miriam is also very important because when they go over to the Red Sea and they're trying to leave Egypt, the Pharaoh changes his mind. He let them go because his own son was killed, okay? But, and he thinks about it, he said, now all these people fleeing my land, we're going to be poor for it. And he says, charioteers, go back and get those people back. And in the meantime, before they can get them back, Miriam is dancing, and she's dancing with her what is like a tambourine, and it's a timbrel, and she sings the important song, Miriam's song in the Bible. So she's very important because she keeps hope alive, and she sees what can possibly happen to the Jewish people. So Batia, the queen, is also very important because again, she's an Egyptian woman. But she takes Moses and she keeps him as her own. And she brings him up like us. So we have to always remember all the great people and the women who helped us, who nurtured us. They weren't our people, but they treated us like them. And we have to respect those women too. So we have these shining examples of women who are really heroines in the Passover story. So I always like to talk about them. Can we play Miriam's song for you? Because it's a beautiful song, Miriam's song, when she dances to the temple. Listen to the words.
She was one which sang our history with every strand and every
So again, songs to depict the story, and the songs come from all over the world. I just wanted to say a little bit about different Passover traditions. Do we have time? So the way we do Passover, every community is different, okay? I told you we have the matka, we go and crash it. My mother always used to say, in those days in Calcutta, there were so many Passover services, and Jews lived close to each other all over Dharamtala and behind the New Market, all the way to Park Street, and everybody knew that a Seder was going on in the next family, right? And they would try to see who's further along, because the boys wanted to go out and they wanted to do something else, and they had all their other plans. So they would like to know that they wanted to finish their Seder first, but somebody like me would stop them and say, no, let's talk about this and let's talk about that. So finally, when the mud was going to be thrown, most of the young guys wanted to go out and break the par. Why did they want to do it? Because they wanted to smoke, okay? And they wanted to see and chat with each other and find out what's happening, and then come back, to the Seder table. So there's all kinds of digressions always in the Seder table, at the Seder table. Now, I was looking online because I wanted to think about Passover, to talk with you about it, and there's some wonderfully crazy traditions in Passover. Now I've read that Jews in Afghanistan, it's our kind of Jews, okay, who settled over there. Oh, did you know actually what's the main tribe of Afghanistan? It'll come to me in a minute. They're all supposed to be Jews, okay? The Afghanis are supposed to be Jews. They're part of the lost tribe, and there's actually talk about that. But this is a tradition of the Jews us Jews, the Baghdadi Jews who lived in Afghanistan. They actually hit each other at the table like this with scallions. Okay, they take the scallions and they beat each other like this. And the symbol this is to represent the beating of the slaves, okay? And so they beat each other with scallions. Moroccan Jews, the last day of Passover, it's not a big deal day, but they throw a special party, and they have sweetmeats and everything else built with using only Passover ingredients, and that's their way of celebrating Passover. Soviet Jews actually didn't know much about Passover because they were not allowed to practice Passover at their time. So their traditions were quite different. They didn't really have it, and Jews had to go back and teach them their traditions. And so they remember their slavery and their blindness because they didn't actually know their own traditions. So Passover is a very important story to bring people back to their traditions. Now, as we talk about Passover, it's you do all these things in freedom. We talk about spring, but it's also a spiritual awakening, okay? So you can read the Passover story at many, many levels, okay? And so from beating of scallions to spiritual freedom, it runs the whole gamut. And depending on your scholarliness or your level of learning, the Passover story becomes more meaningful. And people debate this for years, hundreds of years, of what is the meaning of each part and how should we interpret these stories, okay?
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, if any of you have any question.
Like in so many other religions, whenever you have a festival, there is an exchange. People give or take gifts. Do you do the same in your passing over?
No, Passover is not about gift giving. No, it's not about gift giving. It's not about new clothes. It's a time where we get together as family. Usually families, no matter where they are in the world, will come back to be there for the Seder. It's to rejoice together as a family, and it's to remember our history, okay? And to rejoice in that. So actually, our religion is not much about gift giving. Now, I'll give you an example. Hanukkah, right? Hanukkah is a big festival, but actually it's not a very big festival. It's become a big festival because it happens in wintertime right around Christmas. And Christmas is all about gifts giving and the trees. And so the American Jews found that their children were really into this gift stuff. And so they said, okay, if they have Christmas for one day, Hanukkah is 8 days, we'll outdo them. We'll have 8 days of gifts. And they do that. But really, that's not part of our tradition. So these are things that come over time. I don't remember growing up with gifts being any part of our festivities, but we had wonderful festivals and we really enjoyed them. But it wasn't about gifts. Only in Rosh Hashanah, which is the New Year, we got new clothes. And then we strutted in the synagogue to look better than everybody else. But other than that, ours is not a gift-giving tradition. And so in Passover, you can't take anything because, before Passover, you have to clean the house. We're going to talk about this. And it's like a crazy way of cleaning. It's like spring cleaning, but you have to get rid of everything that's hamis, anything that's leavened, any grain, anything like that. And the house, everything has to be kosher for Passover. There, like my grandmother was very religious. She had separate Passover plates, which you would only use in Passover. And some people go to the extreme of having a separate Passover kitchen. They would only use that kitchen because there could be no chametz. And there's a tradition which is also crazy. The women, of course, the women do all the work, right? They have to go around cleaning the house and making sure there's no chametz. And the man of the house has to come in with a knife, a wooden spoon, and a feather to see, symbolically, if there's any chametz anywhere in the house. And he goes around and does this inspection. And the woman always has to leave one chametz, usually the same place, on top of the fridge, or she knows every year it's the same place. He finds that one hametz, and then he has to go to the synagogue and get rid of it, So he has all the fun, he does the inspection, she does all the work in the household. But that's
and the
way,
humoring as well.
And the humoring as well. But so you cannot bring something for Passover because it really has to be kosher for Passover. And so the only thing you can bring, and which we would sometimes do, is bring fruits, because that would be something that one could bring to the Passover table.
Except an orange, which you did.
Exactly. So, yeah.
I find a remarkable resemblance with our Diwali cleaning. It's very similar. I mean, everything is thrown out, every drawer is cleaned out. So, this kind of connection, I find these very, very fascinating, actually. How they rubbed off to each other, God knows.
What is the story of the lost tribes who wandered and they finally found haven in various parts of the world, like the Jews in Cochin, the Beni Israelites in the Maharashtra coast? How did they land there? Where were they wandering from?
Okay, so the lost tribes is something different. There was the destruction of the temple, and Jews had to go to many parts of the world, and they're scattered. And people have found, and there's a whole organization that's interested in bringing back the lost tribes, and find out where they are. The lost tribes in India, the one that is considered and accepted as a lost tribe is the Beni Menashe of the Manipur area of the northeast, And they've been rediscovered. I don't think they really pass of the lost tribe. Their DNA doesn't really match. But Israel was looking at how they bring people in from different parts of the world. They converted to Judaism. They were Christian Messianic sect. They said they were part of the lost tribe, and Israel accepted them. So the lost tribes, have been found in Ethiopia and different parts of the world. But that's not the Passover story. The Passover story is really about the Jews who had to go to Egypt, the land of Goshen, and then they wandered 40 years in the desert, where they were wandering in the Sinai, where Moses got the 10 Commandments, and then they did all kinds of bad things. For example, they bowed towards graven images, they built that golden bull, they did all kinds of things where they idol worship against what God had taught them to do. And so he made them keep on wandering and wandering till Moses was not even allowed to lead them into the promised land. It was Aaron who actually took them to the promised land. And they get to the promised land, and they live in the promised land for years. And then again, it's again about upheaval and destruction. And the Romans came, and the Greeks came. And if you go to Israel, everybody has come through that land. And the Jews spread out again, And many of them actually are Jews, went to Baghdad. And that's where we think the most, there are two important Talmuds was written in captivity when we were out of Israel. So the Lost Tribe story is a different set of stories about Jews who are scattered all over the world. But the Beni Israeli Jews apparently were coming from Israel. They were shipwrecked off the coast of the Konkan coast, and they've lived on the Konkan coast for 2,000 years. Now, they have very different Passover traditions as well. For them, Elijah is very important in the whole Passover story. And they believe that Elijah actually took up from his chariot, from a big rock in Alibag, and they go and actually pray at that rock even today. So that's a different set of stories, but it's not the Passover story. There's so many stories about Judaism.
Does anyone else have a question to ask or anything? Okay, then I think we are on time. Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening. I hope you got some sense of what Passover is about and how we celebrate it. And if you go home and you just fiddle around on Google and just do Passover and look at a Seder, you'll get a better sense. And you can listen to Dayenu because you know it now. Listen to different tunes of Dayenu and all these wonderful songs about Passover, which bring the festival to light. And actually, as a child, it really makes your memories of those stories very clear because they're enacted, and sung. And it's the music and the tastes and the symbolic food that, you recall as a child. And then as you grow up, the story becomes more sophisticated.
Thank you, Yar. This was a fascinating session of something.
Shalom, Lahitzor, thank you.
And it was something that I've always wanted to know about. And thanks to you now, I think I know a little bit. There's a lot more to be learned and studied and researched. But this is what Moksha Talks is all about. This is about going into areas that I feel I don't know much about, but it's interesting for me, and I always find the challenge very, very challenging. And it's very nice to be able to do things with my friends here and who have been with me all the way right from the time we started in October. Looking forward to more and more of such sessions, looking forward to more and more participation, looking forward to more people like you who will come and enlighten us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.